Abyzou's origins can be traced as far back as ancient Mesopotamia, around 2000 BCE. In her earliest known form, she was feared under the name Lamashtu, a goddess said to be the daughter of the sky god Anu. But rather than using her divine status to protect mankind, Lamashtu pursued her own desires. Her appetite for the flesh of human children eventually led to her banishment from the heavens. Cast out by her father Anu, she wandered the earth in search of victims, becoming one of the most feared entities in Mesopotamia. Lamashtu is often described as having the head of a lioness, the teeth and ears of a donkey, the body of a woman, and the talons of a bird of prey. Serpents hung from her hands while dogs and pigs gathered around her feet. She traveled upon a donkey and was often depicted nursing animals rather than human children. It's a disturbing image because almost every element evokes motherhood, but in a corrupted form. Lamashtu was blamed for disease, persistent fevers, nightmares, and disturbed sleep. She poisoned rivers and streams, destroyed vegetation, spread sickness wherever she traveled, and was said to feed upon human flesh while drinking the blood of men.
She used to lick all the blood off her fingers.
But it was mothers who feared her the most. According to Mesopotamian tradition, she stalked pregnant women and newborn infants. It was said that she slipped into homes under the cover of darkness and placed her hand upon the stomach of an expectant mother 7 times in an attempt to kill the unborn child within. The number 7 appears throughout mythology and religion and is often associated with completion, perfection, or divine order. In Christianity, God creates the world in 7 days, there are 7 deadly sins, 7 virtues, and 7 seals in the book of Revelations. Revelation. I always mess that up. In Islam, there are 7 heavens. There are 7 sages in Ocarina of Time. There are 7 Dragon Balls. And in Harry Potter, which is basically a religion at this point, there are 7 Horcruxes and 7 years of school, among other things. Even outside of religion, 7 has a habit of turning up everywhere. There are 7 colors in the rainbow, 7 notes in a musical scale, the 7 seas, 7 continents, and 7 words you can't say on TV, which are shit, fuck, sucker, mother, and we don't know whether the Mesopotamians intended the same symbolism with Lamashtu placing her hand upon the mother's stomach 7 times, but it may have represented the completion of the curse itself. If the child survived a birth, Lamashtu was believed to steal newborns from their cradles or abduct them from their wet nurses before feeding them with her own poisonous milk. The same maternal act that could sustain life instead became a source of death. That's not to say that the mothers themselves were safe from her wrath. They were said to suffer illness, disease, and even death at her hands. In many ancient societies, a woman's status was closely tied to her ability to bear and raise children. Childbirth carried enormous risks, but it was also deeply connected to family survival, social standing, and a woman's place within her community, and Lamashtu threatened all of it. The fear of Lamashtu became so widespread that families sought protection against her influence. Apotropaic amulets were objects believed to shield the wearer and their children from her attacks during pregnancy and childbirth, and these were used by expectant mothers for protection. Many of these protective charms invoked Obizuth, the king of the wind demons. Although he was feared throughout Mesopotamia as a bringer of famine, drought, plague, and disease, Obizuth occupied a strange position within the mythology. While he was certainly no benevolent protector, as you probably know if you've seen The Exorcist or the opening of Scary Movie 2, he was also considered one of Lamashtu's greatest enemies, and among the few entities powerful enough to drive her away.
Because this Obizuth, the sight of his face was enough to drive Lamashtu away altogether.
Amulets and statues bearing his likeness were placed inside homes, hung around the necks of pregnant women, and positioned beside newborn children in hopes that his presence would keep her at bay. For centuries, mothers recited incantations, carried protective charms, and invoked Obizuth's name to keep Lamashtu from their homes. Yet, despite these efforts, her legend still endured. As kingdoms rose and fell, her story traveled beyond Mesopotamia. Her name would change and her form would evolve, but the fear she inspired survived long after Mesopotamia itself had disappeared. To find out how Abyzou transformed from a Mesopotamian demon into a modern curse, the hidden meanings found in children's nursery rhymes, and the clues hidden throughout Undertone that suggest that Evie was connected to Abyzou long before the recordings arrived, stay tuned to the end of this video. Welcome to Horror History. Uzabani Mook, Uzabani Mook, Uzabani Mook, Uzabani Mook. Are you scared yet? Undertone is the 2025 horror film from writer and director Ian Tuason in his feature film debut. The story follows Evangeline, or Evie, a paranormal podcaster caring for her bedridden mother while investigating a series of mysterious audio recordings linked to an ancient entity known as Abyzou. Before premiering at Fantasia International Film Festival in July 2025, Tuason had spent years experimenting with immersive storytelling through his YouTube channel Dimension Gate, creating 360-degree virtual reality experiences that relied heavily on sound to direct an audience's attention. Due to his background in spatial audio, Tuason had a distinct vision for Undertone, approaching it like a video game with what he describes as a 3D soundscape where the audience is encouraged to listen as closely as the characters themselves. Tuason initially conceived the story as a radio play.
It started off as a radio play, like Orson Welles' War of the Worlds, something like that. I was gonna hire 2 actors to do Evie and Justin, and it would be a found footage audio experience.
Even after the project evolved into a feature film, that idea never really disappeared. Undertone is still fundamentally built around people listening. When his parents got sick, Tuason returned home and found himself taking on the role of caregiver, and he ended up rewriting Undertone as a movie. All right, person viewing this video, look, there's no easy way to say this, but you've been adopted. Pack up your bags, because from now on, you're gonna be staying with the sponsor of today's video, Freecash. Freecash is the based in Kino free gaming loyalty rewards app that lets you earn real money just for playing popular mobile games. This is not a get-rich-quick app. Rewards are limited and won't replace a salary. That's right, your new parents wanna give you an allowance, but instead of earning it by cleaning the toilet, you're gonna be playing games. I know, it sounds too good to be true. I had the same thought, so I asked them about how they can afford to pay you to play games. Basically, game developers want people to discover their games, so they pay for that exposure, and Freecash shares a portion of that revenue with players. Freecash even has a great rating of 4.6 stars on Trustpilot with over 260,000 reviews. Do your real parents have a 4.6 on Trustpilot? Probably not. Just download and install Freecash for free, grant permission to track game progress, choose from top free games, and you'll be playing, leveling up, and cashing out. If you'd like to check it out, they are giving you a special offer just for being a CZsWorld viewer. If you use my link below or scan the QR code to download Freecash, you get a $10 bonus as a welcome reward. If you're already spending time on mobile games, you might as well get something back for it. Freecash will not actually legally adopt you, but they will provide legal tender for time spent playing mobile games, so that's pretty much the next best thing you could ask for. Converting his story from audio drama to feature film would fundamentally reshape Undertone. Much like Evie, he found himself confronting fears surrounding responsibility, guilt, and the possibility of failing people that we love the most. In an interview with CBC, Tuason explained that he once described Evie to a friend as his anima, a concept from Jungian psychology referring to the feminine aspect of a man's unconscious mind. Through Evie, Tuason was able to explore feelings he had experienced during his own time as a caregiver. I chose this character to be a woman. I did for many reasons, but one of the things I see in that character is the nurturer, the caregiver, the mother, and the voice inside me that said I was a bad nurturer or a bad mother. The character of Evie also became a way for Tuason to process his own grief and his own heavy drinking during his time caring for his parents. Stating in an interview with Rolling Stone, I was struggling with those feelings of remorse and guilt, then trying to suppress them with drinking. Whatever darkness I fell into, I just drew that when I was writing Evie. It's an interesting way to describe Evie because throughout Undertone, she occupies all 3 of those roles. She spends much of the film caring for her dying mother, while simultaneously grappling with the possibility of becoming a mother herself. That also makes Abyzou a natural choice for the film's antagonist. Across centuries of mythology, the entity has been associated with pregnancy, childbirth, and the deaths of children, themes that sit at the heart of Undertone's story. According to a Reddit Ask Me Anything, Tuason said Undertone was always intended to be a one-location horror, and he chose to film in his childhood home in Toronto, the same house where he had cared for his parents before they passed away, making Evie's challenges in the film very personal to its creator.
I mean, there was this energy in the house because that's where both my parents passed.
Religion also plays a significant role in Undertone, which explains why I put this video off as long as I did. Thank you to the summer 2026 horror lineup for giving me stuff to talk about that isn't religious horror, but I guess there was only so long I could escape it. Throughout the film, Evie's childhood home is filled with crosses, religious imagery, and references to scripture, many of which were inspired by Tuason's own Catholic childhood.
My parents gave me a portrait of Jesus, which was beside my bed, and I'm just looking at Jesus looking at me and waiting for something to happen there too. Sure. Yeah, that really scared me.
I don't know if I've ever mentioned this ever on my channel, but have I mentioned that I'm tired of everything being religious horror? That fascination with religion eventually led Tuason into the world of folklore and demonology, saying he was hoping to find a demon from ancient folklore that killed children, and then found Abyzou, which was a demon from the Testament of Solomon, an ancient book in ancient scripture. She was perfect for this movie. I can only imagine the look on his FBI agent's face when he saw that Google search go through. Then again, mine is probably worse since I literally research all of these horror movies. And on that note, to fully understand how Abyzou evolved from ancient demon into the scourge of Undertone, we need to take it back to the mythos of gods and mortals in ancient Greece. By roughly the 400s BCE, the story of the child-killing entity had spread to Greece, where Lamashtu became associated under a new name, Lamia. Unlike Lamashtu, who was feared as a goddess cast out of the heavens, Lamia was often described as having once been mortal. According to Greek mythology, Lamia was a beautiful mortal queen of Libya, who attracted the attention of Zeus, king of the gods. This immediately caused a problem because Zeus had a habit of attracting attention from women who were not his wife. And his wife, the queen of the gods, Hera, was not the type to sit back and let this happen. When Hera discovered the affair, she directed her wrath towards Lamia and the children that she had with Zeus. In some versions of the story, Hera murdered Lamia's offspring herself. In others, she kidnapped them. Consumed by grief over the loss of her children, Lamia descended into madness.
Abyzou suffered from infertility, making her envious of women who could bear children. She would sneak into the homes of mothers and kill their newborn babies, strangling them to death.
As Greek mythology was passed from person to person through oral tradition, there are varying versions of what happened to Lamia after her loss. Some versions of the myth claim that she clawed out her own eyes in despair. Others tell a far crueler story, where Hera cursed Lamia with eternal sleeplessness, forcing her to relive the loss of her children every waking moment. Unable to close her eyes or find rest, she was condemned to stare endlessly at the memories of everything she had lost. Eventually, Zeus took pity on his former lover, and to ease her suffering, transformed her into a monstrous demon, granting her the ability to remove her own eyes. When she wished to rest, Lamia could pluck her eyes from their sockets and set them aside. When she wished to hunt, she could place them back into her head and continue her search for victims. I wish I had known about this story before I did the episode on the Pale Man from Pan's Labyrinth, because he removes and replaces his eyes in a similar way, and is also a devourer of children. I wonder if the Pale Man would cheat on the Pale Lady for Lamia, or if he's loyal to his girl. As with many figures of ancient mythology, accounts of Lamia's appearance varied depending on who was telling the story. Some described her as an eyeless hag whose face had become twisted and distorted by grief, jealousy, and centuries of violence. Others portrayed her as a monstrous hybrid creature, possessing the upper body of a woman and the lower body of a serpent. In his 1819 poem, Lamia, the poet John Keats described her as having the head and throat of a serpent with the mouth of a woman and spoke words of bubbling honey, which sounds horrifying. You have all the cold scaliness of the serpent, but she can still complain about people leaving the toilet seat up like a woman. Couldn't be me though, I always put it down. Tortured by the loss of her children, Lamia wanted other mothers to feel her pain by robbing them of their children. It was said that Lamia crept through towns under the cover of darkness and slipped into homes where she would steal infants from their cradles, their mother's arms, or even the womb, and devour unborn fetuses. Unlike Lamashtu, whose violence was driven by her insatiable hunger for flesh, Lamia's cruelty was rooted in grief. She's basically the Greek La Llorona out here. The story of Lamia was passed from generation to generation, and she essentially became the boogeyman of ancient Greece, used to scare children into behaving. But that wasn't the only classical monster that Lamia has ties to. In later classical texts, Lamia had evolved into a shapeshifter, who would transform into a beautiful woman to seduce men and drink their blood. Many of the traits associated with Lamia would later become staples of vampire folklore. She was a creature of the night who preyed upon the blood of the living. Many scholars view her as an important precursor to the blood-sucking creatures that would eventually appear throughout European folklore. I swear, everything either comes back to religious horror, Coraline, Dracula, or some combination of the three. Anyway, there's a clear lineage from Lamashtu to Lamia to eventually Abyzou. But traces of her true identity may have survived beneath those names all along. One of the first people to notice this pattern was the scholar A.A. Barb, who proposed that Abyzou's name may ultimately descend from one of the oldest concepts in Mesopotamian mythology, Abyzou. According to her, part of Abyzou's story begins with Abyzou, the primordial freshwater abyss of Mesopotamian mythology. Hidden beneath the earth, Abyzou was believed to be one of the oldest forces in existence, a vast subterranean ocean from which life itself emerged. As civilizations rose and fell, stories of this ancient abyss traveled beyond Mesopotamia and into the wider Mediterranean world. Along the way, the name evolved. The Sumerian Abyzou became the Akkadian Apsu. Later, the Greeks adopted a similar term, abyssus, meaning the abyss or the bottomless deep. This is probably why the roller coaster Abyssus at Energylandia is stationed in an aquatic temple and features blue wave-like speed hills. That's not really super relevant to this video, but I may never get another chance to talk about it on my channel, so I went for it. At first, abyssus referred to a place rather than a being, an endless ocean lurking beneath the world. But when the concept entered the Greek-speaking world, abyssus blended with the feminine entity, Lamia. This theory would make Abyzou's origins far older than many of the myths associated with her. Long before she was blamed for miscarriages, stillbirths, and infant mortality, she may have been connected to one of the primordial forces believed to exist before creation itself. By the 1st century of the Common Era, the pieces had begun to come together. The primordial waters of Abyzou, the abyss of Abyssus, and the child-killing entities of Mesopotamia and ancient Greece all converged into a single name, Obizuth.
This is Obi.
Obi, it's my name.
The most detailed account of Abyzou appears in the Testament of Solomon, an ancient text believed to have been written sometime between the years 1 and 500 CE. That should sound familiar to anyone who watched my episode on Asmodeus from the Paranormal Activity franchise, who is also referred to in texts around that time.
She even appears in Christian text from the 1st century AD in the Testament of Solomon.
The Testament of Solomon presents itself as the personal testimony of King Solomon, the biblical ruler of Israel, best known for overseeing the construction of the first temple in Jerusalem. However, later folklore would give Solomon another reputation entirely. Beyond his wisdom and kingship, some traditions claimed that he possessed mastery over demons and the magical arts. According to these stories, Solomon was granted a ring bearing the seal of God, which allowed him to summon demons, compel them to reveal their names, and force them to disclose the suffering they inflicted upon mankind. One by one, the demons were brought before the king and interrogated. Among them was Obizuth. When she appears before Solomon, her appearance is unlike anything we've encountered so far. Solomon initially describes her as a spirit in a woman's form, with a head without limbs and whose hair was disheveled. You can't blame me for picturing Madame Leota from the Haunted Mansion ride when I hear that. He writes that all her body appeared to be in darkness, while her eyes were altogether bright and greeny, and her hair tossed wildly like a dragon. It's a major departure from the creatures we encountered earlier. Gone is the lion-headed Lamashtu of Mesopotamia and the serpent-bodied Lamia of Greece. Instead, Obizuth appears almost incorporeal, less like a monster of flesh and blood and more like a presence emerging from darkness itself. And unlike many of the demons brought before Solomon, Obizuth is remarkably direct about who she is and what she wants. When Solomon demands her name, she responds, "I am called among men Obizuth, and by night I sleep not, but go my rounds over all the world, and visit women in childbirth." It's an interesting detail because sleeplessness appears repeatedly throughout Abyzou's mythology. Lamia had previously been condemned to remain awake forever, forced to relive the loss of her children. Now, Obizuth openly declares that she sleeps not, and wanders the world searching for her victims. Obizuth then becomes even more direct about her purpose. "If I am lucky, I strangle the child, but if not, I retire to another place, for I cannot for a single night retire unsuccessful." So where Lamia's mythology often centered on grief over the loss of her children, Obizuth shows little trace of that sorrow. And according to her testimony, the deaths of newborns are only part of her work. She tells Solomon that she's responsible for the destruction of children, but also for deafness, blindness, disease, mental affliction, and physical suffering. Obizuth had become a supernatural explanation for almost every tragedy that could befall a child, other than your younger sibling overwriting your 100% save file. What's particularly interesting is that she also describes herself as a fierce spirit of myriad names and many shapes. So actually, long before modern scholars began tracing connections between Lamashtu, Lamia, Obizuth, and eventually Abyzou, the mythology itself was already presenting the entity as something that changed its form as it moved from place to place. It's almost like it's real. Eventually, Solomon asked the question he asked every demon brought before his throne: how can they be defeated? Under the authority of Solomon's seal, the demons are compelled to answer. So Obizuth reveals that her enemy is the angel Apharaoh, identified in the Testament of Solomon as Raphael, the angel of divine healing. Solomon orders for Obizuth's hair to be bound and commands that she be hung up in front of the temple of God for all to see.
King Solomon had her hung in front of the Temple of Jerusalem as punishment.
It's a strangely specific punishment. Before, her wild, disheveled hair had been one of her defining features. Now, the king orders it restrained before displaying her as a public warning. Yet, despite this, the fears that Obizuth embodied would prove far more difficult to destroy. By roughly the 300s, the mythology surrounding Obizuth had begun to evolve once again, spreading throughout the eastern Mediterranean. As stories passed between languages and cultures, her name Obizuth became Abyzuth and finally Abyzou.
Abyzou?
The taker of children.
We made it! We're here. The name settled on Abyzou around the time of the Byzantine Empire in modern-day Rome. Editor, play Byzantine by Weezer.
You don't have the rights to that.
Oh. Play it anyway. Although her purpose remained unchanged, the mythology surrounding Abyzou continued to evolve. Rather than introducing entirely new stories, Byzantine traditions became increasingly concerned with preserving older beliefs and rituals believed to protect mothers and infants from her influence. Across the Byzantine world, mothers carried protective amulets, midwives recited prayers against her, and protective inscriptions were placed near cradles, doorways, and birthing beds. Abyzou's influence would survive long after the Byzantine Empire began to decline, though. Throughout the Middle Ages, from 400 to 1500, her story continued to spread across Europe and the Eastern Mediterranean via folklore and local traditions. But as the medieval world gave way to the modern age, something began to change. For thousands of years, Abyzou had served as an explanation for tragedies that few people understood. Gradually, physicians and scientists began uncovering natural explanations for many of the afflictions once attributed to supernatural forces. Advances in medicine transformed humanity's understanding of pregnancy, childbirth, and infant health. As a result, belief in Abyzou slowly began to fade as fewer and fewer people would listen to her story. But Abyzou was never entirely forgotten. Sometime in the late 1900s, Abyzou claimed her first victim in the film's timeline. The target was a single woman who was renting a room in the basement of a home in San Diego. As time went by, the family living above began to notice increasingly erratic behavior. Night after night, the woman played music from the basement.
She would play music every night in reverse.
In reverse? Really? What song?
I don't know, sounded like kids singing backwards.
It reminds me of YouTube videos that I used to watch as a kid, alleging that the Beatles hid creepy messages in their music by backmasking.
Number 9, number 9, number 9, Neanderman.
Apparently this was proof that John Lennon was alive. But songs and nursery rhymes being played backwards, or backmasking, will become important later in this story, but we'll come back to that. As time passed, the woman's behavior became more and more concerning until one night, the family upstairs heard a cry through the pipes. The father went downstairs to investigate and found the woman repeatedly swinging a garbage bag against the furnace. When he pulled the bag away from her, he discovered her infant child inside. The woman was then arrested for the killing. This case ties into the idea that the entity was believed to kill children herself. Now, it would appear that she manipulates mothers into becoming the instrument of their filicide. One victim was said to have spent days texting a strange phrase to random phone numbers before drowning her 9-month-old daughter in the kitchen sink. Another, a ceramic artist, created hundreds of figurines of deceased children and handed them out to women throughout her neighborhood before being admitted to a hospital. 5 months pregnant, she would later decide to end it. Abyzou's next known victims were a couple named Jessa and Mike who live in Toronto, Canada. From a neighbor's later account, we know that Jessa was pregnant.
Jessa, she was 5 months pregnant.
Abyzou's presence in their lives started with Jessa sleep-talking, waking her partner, Mike. On the first night of recording, the pair fell asleep, but 4 hours later, Mike woke up to hear Jessa singing the nursery rhyme, "London Bridge is Falling Down." The next night, she went missing from bed, and Mike eventually found her listening to a backwards recording of the same nursery rhyme she'd been singing the previous night. Over the following nights, the disturbances continued to escalate, with unexplained sounds within the house and sink taps inexplicably running in the middle of the night. Water has followed Abyzou throughout much of her story, as I mentioned with her ties to the primordial freshwater abyss of Mesopotamia. On the 4th night of recording, Mike wakes to find her sitting alone in the dark, repeatedly pulling the cord on a baby sleep time doll and listening to it speak. Despite Mike teasing her about how creepy the doll is, she returns it to its protective plastic bag and the pair return to bed. But hours later, they wake to hear a loud thumping sound in the house and Mike goes to investigate. The following night, Mike wakes up to Jessa talking in her sleep again, repeating the same phrase. At first, the phrase appears to be meaningless nonsense. Later, however, it becomes clear that it's "come in Abyzou" spoken backwards.
It says, "Come in Abyzou," in reverse.
The 7th night, because of course it would be the 7th night, there is a significant escalation. Mike awakens to the sound of a crying baby somewhere inside the house. Moments later, he hears Jessa scream. Rushing to find her, he discovers her standing beside a sink in a state of terror after experiencing what appears to be a vision involving their unborn child.
What is it? There's nothing in here.
Here, Abyzou appears to be following her new MO of manipulating the mother into being the one to destroy their own child. And once again, it's tied to the element of water. But it wouldn't be long before the evil presence building in the house would overpower everything they had to throw at it. The following night, another nursery rhyme enters the haunting. Mike hears "Ba Ba Black Sheep" echoing through the house. As with the London Bridge is falling down before it, something traditionally associated with childhood innocence has become distorted into a source of fear, used to torment the parents-to-be. As Jessa's condition deteriorates further, she finally begins remembering fragments of what has been happening to her. On the 9th night of recording, she describes waking in the night, unable to move, and finding a shadow standing next to her bed, prompting her to recite the Hail Mary prayer to drive away the evil, but the figure just laughs and recites it alongside her. We know that for centuries, mothers relied upon prayers, incantations, and amulets for protection, but it seems that one of Christianity's most recognizable prayers is powerless to such an ancient evil. Abyzou's influence over Jessa reaches its peak on the 10th night of recording. Mike describes her as burning up with a fever while she repeatedly insists that she's listening, and that she needs to warn her. It's a detail that links back to older mythology, when Lamashtu inflicted sickness and persistent fevers among mothers and children. Before Mike can stop her, Jessa gets out of bed, screams, smashes a light, all while the cries of a baby can be heard throughout the house. She also calls her husband Mike by the wrong name.
Something's wrong, Justin. I'm so cold.
It's unclear what exactly happened next, but sometime later, police enter the property and discover Jessa and Mike dead at the bottom of a staircase, with plastic bags over their heads, a twisted inversion of Jessa's concern over keeping her dolls nice and new by preserving them in their plastic bags. The walls of the home are found covered in drawings of infants and unborn children, and the expectant parent's fate seems to mirror the stories that have followed Abyzou for centuries: disturbed sleep, illness, strange voices, and an increasing fixation on children. This brings us to the main events of Undertone, which take place over 9 days, beginning Friday, March 3rd, 2026, with 2 podcasters, Evie Babbage and Justin Manuel, recording the latest episode of their podcast, the Undertone Podcast.
Welcome to another episode of the Undertone Podcast, where we talk about all things creepy. I'm your in-house skeptic, Evie Babbage, and I'm joined by my co-host and Santa Claus believer, Justin Manuel.
New episodes every Friday, anywhere you get your podcasts.
After the episode airs, Justin receives an email from an unknown address, uzibanamuk@email.com. Ooh, it's coming Abyzou backwards again, but now in the form of a generic email address. Throughout folklore, supernatural entities often require permission to enter a person's life. Vampires are perhaps the most famous example, needing an invitation before crossing the threshold of a home. In some German traditions, doppelgangers are bound by similar rules. If the same principle applies here, then come in Abyzou is the demon's invitation. The evidence seems to suggest that the email originates from someone being controlled or manipulated by Abyzou. During the previous episode of the Undertone Podcast, a user named EVFanForever leaves the comment, "Look and lick all the blood off." This does come back later in the film, but it also links back to Abyzou's history of feeding on human blood. If the email does come from a demonic entity, it represents a significant evolution in her mythology. For most of history, her stories survived through oral tradition, the primary form of storytelling through most of history. But if you think about it, podcasts, internet horror stories, and creepypastas serve many of the same functions that folklore once did. They're the modern campfire stories, shared between strangers and passed from person to person, evolving as they spread. In many ways, it feels like the natural next step for Abyzou. If her story survived for centuries by being told and retold, then the internet gives her a larger audience than ever before. The email contains 10 MP3 audio files, the recordings of Mike and Jessa, with the subject lined, "LOL, beware of listening to all," which is kind of like a warning not to push the big red button. Someone's going to push the big red button. Yeah, if Undertone is gonna use 2007 internet horror tropes, then I am gonna throw in some 2007 memes in my analysis. Who's gonna stop me? Now to Evie, the skeptic who willingly opens the I Feel Wonderful video, despite its reputation for killing 92 of its viewers, listening to Mike and Jessa's recordings is an exciting challenge. The email also contains a strange sequence of descending letters that eventually forms the phrase atonement attenet. The meaning is never fully explained, but both words carry strong religious associations. Atonement refers to making amends for wrongdoing, while attenet is a foundational belief, particularly within a religious tradition. It could be literally translated as the belief you can be forgiven, which, given the film's theme surrounding guilt, feels very intentional. The reference to attenet could also be connected to the 10 audio files, but like many of the clues surrounding Abyzou, the message appears less interested in providing answers than in encouraging the listener to search more for meaning. At the time the email with the recordings arrives, Evie has just recently returned to her childhood home in Toronto to take care of her dying mother. Healthcare workers have advised her to listen for what's commonly known as the death rattle, an irregular breathing pattern that often occurs shortly before death. The house itself reflects the deeply religious environment she grew up in. Crosses and religious artwork hang on the walls, and images of Jesus and the Virgin Mary appear throughout the home. But it's all at odds with her own relationship with the religion.
When I was young, she used to pray by my bedside every night, every single night. And when she got really sick, she asked me to pray with her every single night. And I said I couldn't because I was too busy, tired, but it wasn't true.
See, I'm not the only one who's tired of it. But there's one other detail. Evie is pregnant, but struggling to come to terms with it, making her the perfect target for Abyzou. In an interview with Time magazine, Ian Tuason said, the idea was that Evie doesn't want to have the child, and maybe she's unconsciously summoning this demon to take away this burden that she has. That was the original idea. Soon, Evie and Justin would record their next episode, but little did they know, it would be their swan song. On Saturday, March 4th, Evie and Justin began recording the next episode of the Undertone podcast, during which they try reversing the London Bridge audio, and Justin believes that he can hear a hidden message in it.
So, did you hear it?
Hear what?
Mike, kill all.
Evie dismisses this audio as apophenia, the tendency to perceive unintended meaning in random sounds. Justin, however, becomes more interested in the history of the nursery rhyme itself, and uncovers a story linking the rhyme to Eleanor of Provence, a medieval queen of England whose children supposedly died young. According to the legend, she feared London Bridge would collapse unless children were sacrificed within its foundations, and ordered orphaned children to be buried alive beneath the structure. This urban legend does exist in the real world, but it's unlikely that Eleanor believed that human sacrifice would save the bridge, and it's also widely debated that this is what the song is about, with many believing that it actually refers to an alleged attack on London Bridge during the Viking siege of London in 1014. When Evie asks him to look up another nursery rhyme, Baba Black Sheep, he finds another creepy backstory. This one involving a farmer whose family starved to death after his sheep were born with black wool. According to the story, villagers later discovered the animals feeding upon the family's corpses. Another interpretation is that it's about the medieval wool tax under King Edward I, but despite taxes being pretty horrifying, I'm not sure it works as well in a horror movie. But once you look into other nursery rhymes, the pattern of children meeting an early fates appears everywhere. Rockabye Baby ends with an infant falling from a tree. Ring Around the Rosie has long been associated with plague, disease, and mass death.
So all children's songs are about children dying, except things happening to kids.
Not even that. I think it's about kids suffering for the things adults do. Maybe to warn kids that adults do messed up things, and they should be aware of them. They're cautionary tales.
In many ways, that also describes Abyzou's mythology. For thousands of years, children have suffered because of her actions. Sometimes because of her hunger for flesh, sometimes because of her grief, and sometimes simply because she desired a victim. After listening to File 3, Evie feels strange and asks to take a break. They only actually recorded for 11 minutes and 53 seconds, and you'll notice that this is always how it goes when they record an episode. Evie is the worst podcast co-host ever. Inside baseball here, it is true that most content creator duos are kept alive by one person who does most of the work, but this is ridiculous. After she leaves the call with Justin, a light switches on upstairs. Based on the fact that Evie's mother is supposedly bedridden, I'll cite this as the beginning of the demonic infestation. Like other cliche religious horror movies, it starts small and grows into oppression and possession with time. In the meantime, Evie gets back from a doctor's appointment where we learn that she's approximately 6 weeks pregnant to find her mother collapsed on the floor, not dead, do not demonetize me. There, she discovers an unusual statuette depicting the Virgin Mary covering her breasts as countless babies climb her like she's the last visitor of the night at an abusive orphanage or something. Or maybe it's meant to depict her as the savior with them crawling up from hell, desperately hoping their mother can free them from Abyzou's grasp. It's clear though that Evie is not that mother, and disturbed by the figure, she hides it away in a drawer, which contains a crayon drawing which appears to depict Abyzou herself. And yes, I'm aware there are alternate pronunciations for crayon. There's nothing scarier than a disturbed child's drawing in 2026, right? Abyzou's really not beating the 2010s internet horror cliche allegations with this one. I'm not gonna try to logically explain why this exists, but I will note that the drawing closely resembles another piece of religious artwork found elsewhere in the house, in which a winged figure holds a swaddled baby in the same way. But there, the child is upright, protected, and cradled in loving arms, as if each represents the good and evil outcomes of the pregnancy. Throughout Christian tradition, the Virgin Mary represents the ideal mother, a figure associated with protection, sacrifice, and unconditional love. Abyzou occupies the opposite. On Tuesday, March 7th, almost 3 days after listening to the recordings, Evie experiences many of the same disturbances that previously affected Mike and Jessa, like running water from one of the sinks upstairs. Evie also finds herself turning to the bottle. And not the baby bottle. You're not supposed to drink any alcohol during pregnancy, but she literally fills her coffee mug with whiskey, and then keeps the bottle nearby like she's gonna pour more later. Obviously, this is something that can drastically increase the likelihood of a miscarriage, which creates a parallel between her behavior and Abyzou's. We already know that she's been hesitant about her pregnancy, so it very much feels like this is on purpose. She even tries to hide it from Justin during the next recording session. That night, they listen to audio files 4 and 5, picking up a faint whisper in number 4, and a Jessa repeatedly speaking the phrase Uzabani Mook in number 5. Once again, Evie feels unwell and recording is postponed until Thursday. At this rate, they'll get a whopping 2 episodes finished this year. I don't want to see any comments calculating my upload frequency on Pumpkin Metal, okay? The following night, Evie investigates the whisper, and for some reason she decides to play files 4 and 10 on top of one another. When the recording is reversed, Evie finally hears the phrase in full. It's Turn Me On Dead Man all over again. She begins repeating the phrase to herself. However, the next time she talks to Justin, Thursday, March 9th, Evie feigns surprise when he shares that he's made the same discovery.
I looked up the name Abyzou. It's the name of a demon from Middle Eastern and European folklore.
His research claims that Abyzou began as a woman who suffered from infertility, and consumed by jealousy towards mothers who could bear children, she began strangling newborn infants. These religious nuts will literally do anything but IVF.
King Solomon had her hung in front of the Temple of Jerusalem as punishment. But her envy survived into the afterlife, twisting her into a demon who wandered the world and caused miscarriages and stillborn babies.
The film takes some liberties with Abyzou's origins, with her beginning as a human woman before being transformed into something monstrous, not the other way around. It could be explained by saying that whatever Justin found online is essentially a condensed version of the real backstory, combining several different strands of her mythology into a single origin story. The film also introduces another legend connected to Abyzou, this time involving a statue of Saint Rita on Cyclical Island in the Philippines.
Who believe that Abyzou entered a statue of Saint Rita of Cascia, the patron saint of cursed mothers. Locals claimed that a woman who worshipped the statue killed her husband for cheating and then killed their baby, and placed the baby's skull with an inverted crucifix in the statue's hands, where they still are today, according to tourists.
In reality, there is a Saint Rita of Cascia, and she does have a human skull and crucifix in her hands. However, there is no link to Abyzou or any of her earlier forms. Because of her striking appearance, there are legends surrounding what the locals called Black Magic Maria, not to be confused with Messy Maria, but they mostly consist of claims that the statue comes alive at night and wanders the island. The story of Abyzou appears to bother Evie, so she pushes Justin to investigate the next recording, and after listening to file number 6, where Jessa has no memory of screaming in her sleep, Justin becomes convinced that the files are documenting some form of demonic possession. Evie remains skeptical, arguing that many historical cases can be explained through mental illness, psychosis, and conditions that they simply didn't understand at the time. After hearing a distressed Jessa describe visions of a baby in the sink in recording number 7, Justin attempts to reply to the sender of these emails, but his response immediately bounces back with the message that the address wasn't found, which means he must have been notified by the mailer demon. So I looked it up, and the term mailer demon actually does come from the word demon. The ancient Greeks had this concept called a demon, which was not good or evil, but just a supernatural being that could perform background tasks. Much like how the mailer demon you get when you type in the wrong email address works as a background system on a computer. There's your free horror history episode on the mailer demon. Not realizing any of this, Evie dismisses Justin's concerns and pushes him on to listen to the next file. Undertone is fundamentally about listening. Its characters listen to recordings, nursery rhymes, and folklore. Their audience listens to their podcast. Evie spends her night listening for signs that her mother is about to die, and even the inspiration for the film began with audio. But no one is forcing them to continue. Abyzou may have sent the files, but Evie and Justin choose to keep listening. Participation is how folklore survives, and the stories endure because they're retold. Nursery rhymes endure because they're repeated by parents and teachers, and Abyzou endures in very much the same way. As a podcaster and self-described skeptic, Evie is naturally driven to investigate. But given everything we've learned about her, and Tuason's point that she unconsciously called out to Abyzou, it's possible that there is an underlying desire to let Abyzou in, and relieve the burden of the child that she doesn't really want. When they listen to file number 8, they hear Ba Ba Black Sheep playing, the nursery rhyme that Evie's mom used to sing to her as a child. For the first time, the recordings appear to strike a nerve, and Evie seems genuinely unsettled by what she's hearing, almost as if the inclusion of Ba Ba Black Sheep is Abyzou speaking to her directly.
Evie, it was the same version.
Coincidences happen. I mean, they're rare, but that's why we get so surprised when they happen.
This feels different to me.
Justin suggests abandoning the episode altogether, worried that they're playing with fire. But despite her discomfort, Evie has other ideas.
Make this episode 2 parts. Publish on Friday, record part 2 next week.
Later that night, Evie sits by her mother's bedside and admits that she's pregnant.
I wanted to name her Mary.
But she immediately confesses that she doesn't believe she can live up to that image. This idea seems to confirm what I said earlier, that she's caught in between the Virgin Mary, who functions as a symbol of idealized motherhood who nurtures and protects, and Abyzou, who seeks to kill and destroy a child. Throughout history, Abyzou has sought out vulnerable mothers, but Undertone raises a more unsettling possibility. What if, on some level, Evie has been seeking Abyzou as well? From there, things get more and more demonic. Evie uses a meditation app whose soothing instructions turn to grotesque descriptions of choking children and whirling toddlers, accompanied by an image of Evie lying at the bottom of a staircase, hands splattered with miscarriage. This is undoubtedly a tie back to Abyzou's real-world mythology regarding disturbed sleep and nightmares after the loss of her children. Evie wakes up from her nightmares and goes to check on her mom, where she seems to hear whispered Hail Mary prayers, but her mom is still unresponsive. What Abyzou appears to be exploiting is Evie's guilt. Her guilt over her faith, her guilt over her pregnancy, and most of all, her guilt surrounding her mother. Which raises an interesting possibility. What if Evie's mother has been dead all along, and Evie is living in a kind of limbo as she slowly deteriorates under the strain of grief and guilt? The film never confirms this outright. Well, it kind of does, but it's debatable. We'll get there. But there are a number of details that support this theory. In the opening scene, the mom's breathing is rattly and strained, the sign that the nurse told her to look out for as a sign of death, but is very much calm for the rest of the film. Evie also has an almost panicked refusal when Justin offers to come help her, and she peculiarly uses the past tense when speaking about her mom.
My mom used to sing that to me when I was a kid. And when she got really sick, she asked me to pray with her every single night.
Then, when she hears Ba Ba Black Sheep, a nursery rhyme associated with her mother, her attention immediately shifts towards what appears to be an urn sitting across the room. It's a dead giveaway. Yes, pun intended. We also see multiple moments when the mom seems to be sitting up watching Evie. This could be a supernatural manifestation created by Abyzou, purposefully using her dead mom to torment her and exploit her grief. There are other moments that could be seen as clues that the mom is already dead, like Evie listening to a voicemail that her mom left, something that those in mourning often do to hang on to the past, the fact that we never see the nurse who is supposedly doing a house call, it's voice only, and the fact that her mom doesn't take the drink offered to her. She wouldn't be able to deplete it if she's already gone. As Evie and Justin moved on to recording part 2 of the episode, a series of guest callers would throw everything into chaos. After the release of part 1 of their Abyzou episode, Evie and Justin began recording part 2. Don't worry, I will not subject you to a two-parter. If I did Light Yagami as a single video, there's no way in hell I'm splitting up the Abyzou episode. In file number 9, they hear Jessa complaining that she doesn't feel well, broken down by Abyzou's torment, and at this point, Evie isn't looking much better herself. She looks tired, she's irritable, and spends much of her time compulsively drawing with crayons. All too similar to the picture we saw in the drawer. It's also becoming increasingly clear that Abyzou is actively manipulating the investigation itself. She cuts files short, ends conversations abruptly, and even alters time. When they finally get to the 10th file, they hear a distressed Jessa desperately trying to warn someone.
No, I need to warn her. She's listening. She's listening. I have to warn her.
Viewed from this side of the events, I think that it's likely Jessa talking about Evie, as if Abyzou's influence created a bridge through time. But before she can say anything more, Abby cuts the recording short. Time stops on the clock, and for the first time, Evie becomes scared.
We should stop listening.
We are never gonna finish this fucking podcast, man. The clock resumes on its own, and Evie and Justin listen as Mike and Jessa are tormented by the sound of a crying infant. Evie becomes visibly distressed when she hears a woman say, "Something's wrong, Justin, I'm so cold," basically confirming that this couple from the past is addressing them directly. Unnerved, Evie turns on Justin and accuses him of being behind everything, but before he can defend himself, they receive a call-in from a voice asking to speak with Mary. Which is significant because Mary is the name Evie had chosen for her unborn child. This caller's voice turns demonic, prompting Justin to hang up. Before they can make sense of that call, they receive another.
You shouldn't have called out to her. Abyzou, she waits in the 10th file at the witching hour. You shouldn't have listened to all of them. What were you thinking?
The warning is the best diegetic evidence that Evie subconsciously invited Abyzou into her life due to her internal conflict about having the baby. Almost immediately, another caller introduces herself as Abby. Overwhelmed by the sound of her crying baby, she begs Evie and Justin for help, and repeatedly insists that she's no good and doesn't know what she's doing. Many of the same fears expressed by Evie herself. In an attempt to connect with Abby, Evie confesses something.
I killed my mother.
On one level, she's clearly speaking through guilt. She describes avoiding her mother's request to pray together and feeling responsible for abandoning her when she needed her most. But viewed alongside the theory that her mother may have been dead since the beginning, the statement takes on a second meaning. Evie's attempts to reassure Abby sound remarkably similar to the reassurances that she seems unable to give herself. When she tells Abby that she's good, it feels less like she's speaking to a stranger and more like she's trying to convince herself. Evie's attempts to get through to Abby appear to have failed, as Abby begins laughing before a deeper voice emerges, and what do you mean Abby was actually just Abyzou all along? What a surprising twist. And this is where the distinction between the recordings and reality finally collapses. We hear backmasked nursery rhymes, see paranormal mayhem, and fragments of sounds heard throughout the film lay over one another.
I'm praying for you.
My mommy.
The crayon drawings that she's been obsessively drawing throughout the entire investigation are revealed to be a large image of the Mind Flayer, I mean Abyzou, holding a swaddled infant, a larger version of the same drawing that we saw hidden away in her mother's drawer earlier in the film. Now, at her weakest moment, Evie finally enters her mother's room, and we discover that it's empty, with a perfectly made bed, adding further weight to the possibility that her mother has been dead for much longer than Evie is willing to admit. But rather than this being a moment of closure, Abyzou weaponizes it. Throughout the film, she's exploited Evie's deepest fears, her guilt surrounding motherhood, her religious upbringing, and her inability to let go of her mother. Now, a figure resembling her mother appears in the bathroom. Whether this is a supernatural manifestation, a hallucination, or Abyzou herself hardly matters. Or just a really untimely point for her mother to come back out of her coma. Probably not that, but it would be funny. There's a twisted irony in Abyzou's choice to attack Evie in the image of her mother. While her intended victim here is Evie and her unborn child, it's ironic that Evie's death is brought about by her own mother. But despite not seeing the aftermath of Evie's attack, I think the film gives us the answer much earlier. Throughout the story, Evie experiences fragments of an event that she doesn't yet understand. She dreams of herself lying at the bottom of the stairs with blood on her hands. She repeatedly hears an unexplained thudding sound somewhere in the house. And in the 10th recording, she hears a voice saying, "Something's wrong, Justin, I'm so cold." By the end of the film, these seemingly disconnected events begin to form a more coherent picture. The thudding may be the sound of Evie falling down the stairs. The image of Evie lying at the bottom of the stairs wasn't simply a nightmare, but a glimpse of the miscarriage to come. Likewise, the voice heard in the 10th file appears not to belong to Jessa, but to Evie. Rather than simply haunting her victims, Abyzou appears to collapse the boundaries between past, present, and future, wearing down their sanity. Long before Evie reaches the end of her story, she has already begun hearing echoes of it. There's a cyclical nature to the ending of Undertone. Just as they listen to the recordings of what happened to Mike and Jessa, we, the audience, are left listening to the final moments of Evie's story. Another tragedy becomes another recording, with another listener potentially becoming Abyzou's next victim. So I want to end with this. The research for this episode provided some insight into director Ian Tuason's own research on Abyzou's mythology. That, and his experience filming Undertone, appear to have changed his perspective on the supernatural. In his Reddit Ask Me Anything, he told one of the commenters, "The most interesting thing is that I wasn't a believer before, but as I began writing this movie and then making the movie, I witnessed things that suggested that these entities are real." Yeah, that's it. Subscribe and do the death bell and all that stuff. I'm done.